I'm Saw, and this is the story of how my husband thought he could outsmart me. It started with whispers in the dark bank transactions I never made, and a name Iliamaro that I had never heard before. Dean, my husband, wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to take everything, but he underestimated me. He thought I would crumble. Instead, I moved first. I protected what was mine, and 1 week later his entire plan backfired. But what's worse wasn't just the betrayal, it was how long he had been planning it, how many lies he had told, and the lengths he was willing to go to destroy me. I woke up to an empty bed. The cold sheets beside me told me Dean had been gone for a while. At first, I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom or grabbed a glass of water. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I caught the faint sound of his voice, low, hushed, careful. The hallway light was off, but a sliver of moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across the floor. My stomach twisted as I followed the sound just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything, yet I stopped mid-step. My breath hitched. Dean's voice was smooth, reassuring, like he was calming someone down. My heart pounded against my ribs. Who the hell was he talking to? I stood there straining to hear more, but the words that followed were muffled. His tone dropped barely above a whisper. My fingers curled into fists. This wasn't some late-night work call. Dean never whispered on work calls. Hell, he never even cared if I overheard his conversations before. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. After a few seconds, I heard his footsteps approaching. I barely had time to dart back to the bedroom before he rounded the corner. My pulse hammered as I slid under the covers, figging sleep. A moment later, I felt the bed dip. His weight shifted beside me, but I kept my breathing steady. A few minutes passed, and then he exhaled, slowly relaxed. Like nothing had happened, I turned over, blinking up at him. "Where were you?" My voice came out soft, groggy, like I had just woken up. "Bathroom," he muttered without hesitation. A lie? And the phone call? Dean barely flinched. "Just a client, had to smooth out some details for a case." I stared at him, watching for any sign of hesitation. He met my gaze, unreadable. As always, maybe I was overthinking, maybe it really was work. But that whisper, that sentence, "She doesn't suspect anything." Yet I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to roll over. My mind was screaming at me, but I ignored it. Not tonight, not yet. The next morning I woke up before Declan. He was still fast asleep, his arm draped across the pillow where my head should have been. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. I didn't usually check our bank accounts. Dean handled most of the finances, and I had never given it much thought. But something felt off. I scrolled through the transactions, my stomach tightened. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000, a dozen withdrawals over the past 3 months, all relatively small but frequent enough to raise a red flag. Dean and I shared expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, but we also had separate accounts for personal spending. These transactions weren't for bills, weren't for investments, and definitely weren't for anything we had discussed. I took a shaky breath, my hands tightening around my phone. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I quickly locked my screen and turned to see Dean leaning against the doorway, rubbing his neck. "Morning," he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "What's for breakfast?" I set my phone down. "I was about to ask you the same thing." He smirked, stepping forward to pour himself coffee. "Guess it's your turn then." I watched him take a sip, his free hand resting on the counter. "I checked our bank account this morning." Dean froze for half a second, just long enough. His grip tightened around the mug before he forced a chuckle. "And there are a lot of small withdrawals." I crossed my arms. "Things I don't recognize." He barely hesitated. "Just small investments, a few business opportunities." "Business opportunities?" Dean nodded, setting his cup down. "Nothing to worry about, short-term gains, that's all." He was lying, I knew it. I just didn't know why. The rest of the day, I tried to shake the unease, but Dean wasn't helping. He was glued to his phone, taking calls in the other room. His screen was always face down when he set it on the table, and every time I looked at him, I felt like there was a wall between us, one that hadn't been there before. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't quiet down. Dean had always been confident, smooth, a man who knew how to talk his way out of anything, but I had been with him long enough to know when something was off, and something was definitely off. I turned to face him. He was already asleep, his breathing steady, his face calm, like a man with nothing to hide. I wasn't convinced. A voice in my head whispered the words I had been trying to push away all day. Am I being paranoid, or is something really wrong? The doubt refused to fade even as the morning light filtered through my window. I had spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Dean's voice from the night before still echoed in my mind, casual, dismissive, yet calculated, the kind of tone someone used when they were hiding something in plain sight. I forced myself out of bed and went about my morning routine, but my movements felt mechanical. My thoughts were stuck in a loop replaying every interaction, every red flag I had ignored over the past few months. And then Dean strolled into the
kitchen like nothing had changed. Morning, babe, he said, pressing a quick kiss to my temple. I was thinking we should probably get our financials in order, just in case of emergencies. I froze my fingers, tightening around my coffee mug. Our financials, I echoed carefully. Yeah, he said, leaning against the counter, sipping his coffee like this was just another normal conversation. Like, do you have a full list of your accounts, passwords, assets, that kind of stuff? We should keep everything in one place. I stared at him, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. Dean had never shown an interest in my personal finances. Sure, we had a joint account for bills, but we always kept our personal savings separate. It was just the way we had always done things. I swallowed, forcing a neutral expression. I mean, I guess I could put something together. His lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes flickered. Just for a second he nodded like it was no big deal before changing the subject entirely. But my mind was already racing. This wasn't about us. This wasn't about just in case of emergencies. Dean was preparing for something, and whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. That evening Dean was uncharacteristically relaxed. He laughed at the TV, scrolled through his phone like nothing was wrong, and even suggested ordering takeout. He was playing the role of a doting husband perfectly, and that's what made my skin crawl. Something had shifted in him, the way he walked, the way he spoke. It was all too easy, too well rehearsed. Then it happened. Dean got up to take a shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. He never left his phone unattended, ever. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. The screen was face down, just like it had been for weeks. But then, as if the universe was throwing me a lifeline, a notification lit up the screen, a text message from a name I didn't recognize, Ilya Morrow. I didn't have time to think. I reached for the phone, my hands shaking as I tilted the screen just enough to read the message preview. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there, my breath hitched, my chest tightened so fast it hurt. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me. Who the hell was Ilya Morrow? And what did they mean by almost there? My finger hovered over the screen for half a second, just long enough for the wildest thoughts to flash through my mind. Was this another woman? Was Dean planning to leave me? Was he hiding money? I heard the water shut off. Panic shot through me as I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and sank into the couch, gripping my knees to keep my hands from shaking. A minute later, Dean strolled back into the room, towel drying his hair. I forced myself to look at him. He was so calm, so at ease, completely unaware that I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to. Did you decide on dinner? He asked, ruffling his hair. I swallowed hard. Not yet. He grabbed his phone without a second glance, unlocking it effortlessly, no hesitation. Like there wasn't a damn thing to worry about, but I knew better now. I spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe Elia was a colleague, a business partner. Maybe keeping me in the dark was about something completely different, something innocent. But deep down I knew better. The pieces were clicking together one by one. The secrecy, the money disappearing, the call in the middle of the night, the way he was suddenly so interested in my finances. I should have confronted him right then and there, but if I was right, if Dean was really hiding something this big, then I needed proof, real proof. So instead I kept my mouth shut. I let him kiss me goodnight, let him slip under the covers like nothing was wrong, and then I lay there gripping my phone, whispering into the dark, who the hell is Ilya Morrow? The next morning the question still haunted me, gnawing at my every thought. I moved through my morning routine like a ghost going through the motions, but my mind was locked onto one thing, Ilya Morrow. The name lingered in my brain like an unsolved puzzle, a piece that didn't fit but refused to be ignored. Dean sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through his phone, perfectly at ease. I wondered if he had any idea I had seen that message. If he did, he was a damn good actor. But then, as if sensing my suspicion, he looked up and smiled. Hey babe, can you sign something real quick? I nearly choked on my coffee. Sign what? I asked, keeping my voice light. Just some financial updates for tax purposes, he said, sliding a document across the table. His tone was casual, but his fingers drummed against the table in an uneven rhythm. I picked up the papers, my stomach tightening as I skimmed through the first page. Legal jargon filled the document, but once became painfully clear this wasn't about taxes. I flipped to the last page, property transfer agreement. My pulse pounded in my ears. My assets, my savings, even the condo, everything would be moved into his name. I forced myself to look up. Dean was watching me, a careful smile plastered on his face. Dean, I said, my voice too controlled. What is this? His smile didn't falter. It's just a precaution, babe, a legal convenience. Nothing changes between us. I stared at him, my grip tightening around the paper. Nothing changes. You're asking me to sign over everything to you? Not everything, he said smoothly, as if that made it better. Just consolidating things for protection, in case something happens. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from rage. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't me reading into things. This was planned. And he had the audacity to sit across from me and act like it was nothing. I
placed the document back on the table slow and deliberate, then I met his gaze. "I'm not signing this," his smile twitched, his jaw clenched for a fraction of a second before he let out a short laugh. "Saw, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." I held my ground. "Then why are you so eager for me to sign?" Without reading in his expression, "Pardon, do you really don't want to do this?" Saw he leaned in slightly, his voice low and controlled, but there was something underneath it, a warning, a threat. I met his gaze. Unflinching. "Is that a threat?" Dean didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression morphing into something dangerously unreadable. The smirk he had worn moments ago faded, replaced with an unsettling calm. "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice too smooth, too measured. I swallowed my anger, keeping my expression neutral. He still thought he was in control, that I was just another move on his carefully planned out chess board. I let the silence stretch, watching him the way his fingers tapped idly against the table, the slight twitch in his jaw. When I didn't respond, he was waiting for me to react, to get emotional, to panic, to break. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. So I smiled just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "You know what, Dean?" I said, lightly, standing up and gathering the papers. "You're right. I do need to think about this." His eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't expecting that, but I had already turned away. Walking to the kitchen and placing the documents neatly on the counter, I wasn't going to argue, not now, not yet, because now I was the one in control. That night, Dean acted like nothing had happened. He moved through our home like we were still just another happy couple, making himself a drink, watching the news, scrolling through his phone. Like he didn't just try to con me into signing away everything I owned. But as I watched him, a realization settled in my chest like a weight this had never been. About saving our marriage. He wasn't trying to fix things, he was setting up his exit, and he wanted to take everything with him. When he left the next morning, I found him in the living room sipping his coffee like he didn't have a single worry in the world. But when I sat across from him, he glanced up immediately, sensing that something had shifted. "We need to talk," he said, setting his cup down. I tilted my head. "Oh," he exhaled, as if this was difficult for him, as if he was the one struggling. "I think we should separate there." It was, he said it like a man delivering a well-rehearsed speech, every word perfectly measured. "It's not working anymore," he continued, his tone. "Even you have to see." That I stared at him, unmoving. He wasn't asking for a divorce. He was telling me it was happening. I let a beat pass, then another before I spoke. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" A flicker of something crossed his face, gone before I could name it. "It's for the best, Saw. We've grown apart, that's what he was going with." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "You mean you want out, but you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed." His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't deny it. I could have screamed, I could have thrown the nearest object across the room, but I didn't, because something had shifted inside me, a steel resolve that hadn't been there before. So I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. Then, as calmly as I could, I said the words that would change everything. "I already moved my assets." Dean's entire posture stiffened, his breath hitched, not enough for someone else to notice. "But I did." "What do you mean?" His voice was too sharp, too controlled. I smiled, slow and deliberate, exactly what it sounds like. His jaw clenched. I saw it then. The second he realized he had lost, he had spent months orchestrating this, setting up every little detail to ensure he came out on top, but he had underestimated me, and he hated that. A long silence stretched between us. Then finally, Dean exhaled sharply and stood up. He grabbed his coffee, took a slow sip, then turned to me with a look that sent ice through my veins. His smile returned, but this time it was colder, calculated. "You're going to regret this, Saw." She wasn't sure if it was a threat or a desperate bluff. Either way, she was ready. Dean had played his hand, and now it was her turn. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I moved through my routine. Coffee tasted bitter, and the silence of the apartment pressed against me like I told myself I wouldn't let his words from the night before get to me. But then came the knock at the door, sharp, measured, official. I set my coffee down and took a breath before opening it. A man in a navy blazer stood on the other side, holding a thick envelope. "Saw Keller." "Yes." He extended the envelope, expression blank. "You've been served." My fingers tightened around the documents. As I watched him walk away, the weight of the envelope felt heavier than it should have been. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. Still, I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, exhaling sharply before sliding my nail under the flap and pulling out the paper's petition for dissolution of marriage. I skimmed down the page, eyes landing on the financial demands. Dean wasn't just leaving, he wanted half of everything: the condo, the car, 50% of our shared assets. And because he had the audacity spousal support, I flipped through the papers, barely suppressing a smirk as she reached the financial breakdown while she said, tapping her nails against the desk, "Hune's got nothing." I raised a brow. "Just like that." She glanced up amused. "Just like that you moved everything into a trust before he filed. That means legally he has no access. He can fight for spousal support, but considering your income history compared to his, it's not happening." I let out a slow breath, my shoulders finally releasing the tension I had been holding on to since that knock on my door. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly in control. Dean had spent all this time thinking he was the one orchestrating the game. He had underestimated me. That evening, I had just finished pouring myself a glass of wine when the front door slammed open. I didn't even flinch. Dean stood there, fury rolling off him in waves. His tie was loosened, and his jaw was clenched so tight, I swore I heard his teeth grind. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" His voice was sharp, venomous. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the way his anger twisted around him like a storm. "I think I'm finally protecting myself." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You planned this." I set my glass down, tilting my head. "So, did you?" Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations. Then finally, he exhaled sharply, his eyes darkening as he muttered, "This isn't over." I exhaled slowly. I had won the first battle, but the war had just begun. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief knowing that Dean had lost his financial grip on me, but I should have known better than to think he would walk away quietly. The first sign of trouble came at work. It started with looks, not the usual passing glances, but lingering stares with whispers that cut off the second I entered the room. By mid-morning, my assistant Rachel hesitated before stepping into my office. "Hey, I think you should know something." I glanced up from my laptop, already exhausted. "What is it?" She shifted uncomfortably. "There's a rumor going around." I wasn't going to say anything, but she trailed off, wringing her hands. "Just tell me." Rachel hesitated, then sighed. "People are saying you took money from your joint accounts, that you were..." She swallowed hard. "Laundering funds." I stared at her. The words landed like a slap. "What? I don't believe it." She added quickly. "But Dean, he's been talking to people, lawyers, mutual friends." The story is spreading. My stomach twisted, fury rising in my chest like wildfire. Dean wasn't just trying to take my money. He was trying to ruin me. By the time I got to my lawyer's office, I was barely holding it together. "This needs to stop now." I slammed the stack of printed screenshots onto the desk, my hands shaking with rage. My lawyer, Patricia, glanced at them and let out a dry chuckle. "Well, he's certainly desperate. He's slandering me, yes, but we can use that." She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her desk. "If he's running around making false claims, he's opening himself up to defamation charges. We send a cease and assist first. If he ignores it, we escalate." I clenched my jaw. "I don't want this to drag out in court. I just want him to stop." Patricia sighed. "He's trying to bait you. Saw he wants you to react emotionally." "Check, right?" I turned to see Beatrix standing by the door with a knowing look. "You can't let him dictate your next move," she said, stepping forward. "You react too fast, and he wins." I swallowed my anger, nodding stiffly, but inside I was seething. Dean wanted a fight. He was about to get one. I found him at La Rue, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, laughing over drinks with two colleagues. The sight of him sitting there completely unfazed, like he hadn't spent the past few days dragging my name through the mud, made my blood boil. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. I simply walked up to the table, leaned down, and whispered, "You have no idea what you've just started." Dean's smirk faltered for a split second before he masked it with an easy grin. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, eyes gleaming with challenge. "Let's see what you've got then." I had given him one last warning. Now I was done playing fair. Dean had spent weeks trying to manipulate, intimidate, and control me. He had underestimated me at every turn. Now, after failing to take my money, after smearing my name, he was taking one final shot. A desperate man is a dangerous one. I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone rang. "Patricia," I answered, sensing that urgency before she even spoke. "You need to come in," my lawyer said without preamble. Dean just filed a motion for a full financial audit. The words sent a sharp jolt through my body. I set my mug down, carefully inhaling deeply. "On what grounds?" Patricia exhaled. "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds and that you owe him a financial settlement." "It's complete nonsense." "But that's not the point. Of course it wasn't. HEK trying to drain me." I muttered. "Legal fees, time, stress. He knows he can't win, so he wants To wear me down exactly, a sharp bitterness curled in my chest. Dean never played to win outright. He played to exhaust his opponent. Not this time, I'll be there in an hour, I said before hanging up. By the time I walked into Patricia's office, she already had Dean's motions spread across her desk, annotated in red. Here's the good news, she said, looking up. He doesn't have a single piece of legitimate evidence. The bad news, this could still drag out for weeks, maybe months, if the court entertains his tactics. I clenched my fists. What's our next move? We counterfile and request an immediate dismissal, she said. We also demand that he pay for all legal costs if the court deems this a stall tactic. I smirked. Let's do it. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Dean.
Courtroom, he was dressed sharp, his tie a little too tight, his smirk barely concealed. He thought this was his moment. His lawyer stood first. Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that Mrs. Keller improperly moved assets to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We are requesting a full forensic audit of all financial transfers made in the past 6 months. I didn't react, I didn't flinch. Patricia, calm as ever, adjusted her glasses and stood. Your Honor, all of my client financial moves were made before Mr. Keller even filed for divorce. There is no evidence of mismanagement or fraud. She slid a thick binder forward. Additionally, we request that this motion be dismissed with prejudice, and that Mr. Keller be required to cover all legal fees, as this is a clear attempt at financial harassment. The judge took their time reviewing the documents, their expression unreadable. The room was tense. Silent. Dean was watching me, waiting for me to squirm. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Finally, the judge looked up. The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit. The motion is denied. Furthermore, due to lack of evidence, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this claim. A sharp clap of the gavel. Just like that, Dean had lost again. Outside the courtroom, Dean walked past me without a word. But as he passed, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear, you think this is over? Just wait, I had won this round. But I knew Dean still had one last move left. Men like him don't walk away quietly. They don't accept defeat. They regroup, rest, strategize, and come back with something even worse. And Dean, he had been plotting this too long to let it end here. I didn't have to wait long to find out what his final move was. The call came the next morning. Saw we have a problem, Patricia said. I gripped the phone tighter. What now? There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. Dean and Ilya have filed a formal complaint. They're accusing you of financial fraud according to their evidence. You've been falsifying financial records for months. I felt the air leave my lungs. If this accusation stuck, I wouldn't just lose money, I could be facing actual legal consequences. They submitted documents. Patricia continued, her voice tight. If the court takes this seriously, you'll be forced into a criminal investigation. The world tilted slightly. I pressed my fingers against my temple, willing myself to stay calm. And the documents are. They reel a scoff on the other end. Absolutely not, but there. Good, someone doctored them. Well, of course, Ilya, the invisible hand guiding Dean's every move. But Patricia added, I had Beatrick take a look at them before calling you, and she found something, a flicker of hope. What she recognized, the timestamps on the financial transfer. Someone forged them. But they didn't realize one key detail. Those accounts didn't even exist when those transactions supposedly took place. I let out a sharp exhale. That was it. That was the mistake that would ruin them. My fear burned away, replaced by something sharper. Dean wanted a war. Fine, I was about to end it. By the time I arrived at Patricia's office, I had made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to bury them. I want to go on the offensive, I said, placing my palms flat on her desk. Not just to clear my name, I want to take them down. Petrish studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good, because we have enough to do it. She motioned to a folder. We contacted a forensic financial analyst, they confirmed what Beatrick found. The documents were doctored. She smiled, sharp and satisfied. So here's what we do. We file a motion proving the documents are fraudulent. Then we sued Dean and Ilya for defamation and falsifying legal evidence. I nodded. And I want full damages. Patricia leaned back, clearly pleased. I thought you might say that. 2 weeks later, I faced Dean in court for what would be the last time. I watched him closely as Patricia laid out our case. She spoke with precision, her voice carrying across